Greetings. Ken Woodward here. Welcome back to another episode of Curated Questions. Together, we engage inquisitive humans about how they use questions to navigate and make sense of our world. I am a fellow traveler and pilgrim on this journey, and I'm glad you're here. There is a book sitting on my desk with a reputation, Being and Time by Martin Heidegger, published in 1927. It is regularly called the most influential work of philosophy in the 20th century. It's also regularly called unreadable. People buy it, crack it open, hit a sentence like, "The question of the meaning of being must be formulated," and quietly return it to the shelf where it spends the next 30 years looking impressive. I picked it up this week because I had heard there was treasure buried in their pages. They were right. 5 pages in, before the famous difficulty even gets rolling, Heidegger stops and does something I have never seen another thinker do with this much care. He dissects a question. Not a particular question, the question. Any question. He lays it out on the table like a watchmaker with the back off a watch, and he names the parts. And here is what got me. We have spent 86 episodes together exploring questions, the science of them, the history of them, the people who wield them well. And I had never once stopped to ask what a question is actually comprised of. So that is today's episode, The Anatomy of a Question, according to the man who mapped it. And then a harder thing, because the man who mapped it has a story, and the story is a warning, and we're not going to look away from it. Heidegger says every act of inquiry is a seeking, and every seeking is guided ahead of time by what is sought. Let me repeat that again because it's worthy of a second time. Heidegger says every act of inquiry is a seeking, and every seeking is guided ahead of time by what is sought. So hold on to that. We'll come back to it. Then, as a watchmaker, he opens up the watch. Every question, he says, has 3 parts. He gives them German names because, of course he does, he's German, but the ideas underneath are plain. The first part is what the question is about, the subject, the territory. If I ask, is this neighborhood safe? The subject is the neighborhood. The second part is who or what we put the question to, the source, the one we interrogate. This is the part we skip past most often, and it might be the most important. A question does not float in the air. It gets put to someone, to a person, a book, a data set, a memory, a God. If I ask, is this neighborhood safe? The answer depends entirely on who is standing in front of me when I ask. The police blotter gives one answer. The woman who has lived on the block for 60 years gives another. My own fear, if I'm the one I'm secretly asking, gives a third. The third part is what the asking is really after. Heidegger calls it what it is to be found out by the asking, the true target, the thing that, when we finally hold it, lets the inquiry rest. And he says something quietly devastating about it. He says this third part is what is really intended. Really intended, meaning the words of our question and the intent of our question are not always the same thing. We have all lived this. Someone asks, "How was your day?" And what they're really asking is, "Are you okay?" A boss asks, "Is the schedule still achievable?" And what they're really asking is, "Do I need to update the boss?" The subject is the schedule. The intent is somewhere else entirely. So that is the anatomy, the subject, the source, the intent. 3 parts, every question, every time. And Heidegger adds one more observation that turns this from philosophy into a diagnostic tool. He says we can ask the question casually with these parts left vague. That is allowed. That is most of life. But the inquiry does not become transparent to itself. His words, until all three parts become transparent. Think about what that means for us. When a question fails, and we have all had questions fail, we usually blame the wording. We think we need a better phrase, a smarter angle. Heidegger suggests the wording is rarely the problem. The problem is that one of the three parts was never assembled. We were clear on the subject, but put the question to the wrong source. Or we had the right source in front of us and never got honest about our intent. The question was not broken, it was unfinished. I spent 32 years in Navy acquisition, watching unfinished questions burn money, review boards asking a contractor whether a struggling program deserved to continue. Read that one with the anatomy in hand, right subject, honest enough intent, and a source with every incentive on earth to give one answer. We did not need better questions in these rooms. We needed to notice who we were interrogating. Now, let me tell you about the second part of the anatomy, the source, the way I actually learned it. Not from Heidegger, but from a backyard in Marshall Heights in Washington, D.C. Some of you know I walked every street and alley in Washington, D.C., 2,085 miles over 102 weeks, wearing a sandwich board sign that read Black and Brown Lives Matter, 1,323 conversations with strangers. On July 3rd, 2021, the walk was shaping up like any other day when a single conversation turned it into a short mileage day. I was walking in Southeast DC when a man invited me into his backyard to talk. His name is Raymond Coates, and I use his real name because Raymond is proud of his place in the story and he has earned the telling. I figured on my standard 20-minute lunch break, I sat down at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We finished talking at 6:45. 5 hours and 45 minutes. His wife came and went. A rain squall passed over us. Early fireworks popped off somewhere in the neighborhood. The conversation did not break once. We covered slavery and history and faith and what it costs to live inside a story that runs separate but not apart from your neighbors. My notes from the day is full of his questions, and they were better than mine. But here is the line that I have carried for 5 years now. Raymond was 61 years old, and in 61 years, he had never once talked with a white person about race. Sit with that through Heidegger's anatomy. For 6 decades, on the most consequential subject in American life, an entire category of inquiry sat unfinished in that neighborhood. The subject was always present. The intent on both sides of the color line was real, even when it was buried. What was missing was the second part, the source, someone to actually stand in front of and put the questions to. The question between Raymond and people who look like me had no one to receive it for 61 years. A question without someone to ask is not a question, it is pressure. It builds in a person, in a family, in a nation. And when somebody finally stands still long enough to receive it, it does not come out in 20 minutes. It comes out in 5 hours and 45 minutes. 10 minutes after I said goodbye to Raymond, 2 other men stopped me on the street. One of them echoed Raymond almost word for word. I was the first white guy who had ever been willing to have the conversation. Twice in one afternoon, the same missing part. So when Heidegger writes that every inquiry needs that which is interrogated, I do not picture a seminar room. I picture Raymond's backyard and 6 decades of questions waiting on a single afternoon of standing still. Now, I have to ask the uncomfortable follow-up, because this is a case study, and the case study is me. Why did Raymond talk to me at all? Why did any of them? I want to give a sober answer, because the flattering answer is a lie. It was not my warmth. Plenty of people walked those streets. It was not courage. I had the journal entries to prove how often courage failed me, and we'll get there. This week, I was at a live podcast recording for Soul Boom and heard the journalist Amanda Ripley describe the writer Arthur C. Brooks. Brooks teaches at Harvard Business School. He is accomplished, very fit, credentialed, everything the culture codes as winning. And he is also openly, publicly a man of faith and tenderness. Ripley's observation was that Brooks works as kind of a transgression. He breaks the expected pattern of what a man like him is supposed to be. And the break is the opening. His students come to office hours and ask him how to stay married and how they can find happiness in work. They would never ask the question of a man who fit the pattern because the pattern has no door in it. I heard that and I finally understood my own walk. Look at my life. 9 years under the ocean as a submarine radioman, 32 years of Navy and federal acquisition, a straight ticket Republican voter from 1988 through 2016, Central Arizona upbringing. I am, by every demographic measure, the man you would cast to argue with the sign, not wear it. And that contradiction was the door. People stopped because the picture did not resolve. A man I call Doc once yelled across the street that my sign was bullshit and then waved bus after bus past for an hour while we talked, and we parted with an embrace. A man in a parked car admitted his first thought on seeing me was, and I'll clean it up slightly, "Get your white behind out of my neighborhood." Then he waved me over because he had to know. The questions came to me because I did not compute. I want to be careful here because this is where a case study can curdle into humble brag. The transgression was not virtue. It was positioning. I did not choose my resume in order to one day be approachable in Southeast DC. The credit for those conversations belonged to the people who decided a walking contradiction was worth interrogating, starting with Raymond. But here is what we can take from it. All of us. Every one of us is the expected person in some rooms and a contradiction in others. And our questions carry furthest in the rooms where we do not fit the pattern. The conservative who asks about justice, the activist who asks about faith, the boss who asks how to stay married. Whoever we are, somewhere there is a room where our asking would be a transgression and therefore a door. The question worth sitting with is whether we are willing to walk into that room. Let's get back to Heidegger, because he has one more gift for us before the reckoning. He says our everyday understanding of things is never a blank page. It comes to us already infiltrated, his word, by traditional theories and opinions. And the infiltration hides. The inherited ideas sink down into how we see, so deep that they stop feeling like ideas at all. They just feel like the way things are. I do not need a philosopher to prove that one. I have my own journals. Week 66 of the walk, 15 months in, hundreds of conversations behind me. I pulled the car up to walk a missed alley near Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, saw several young men grilling, and I drove away. My entry from that night reads, and I quote myself, "They were not doing anything that showed danger, yet I still refused to stop and walk." Week 81, Eastern Market. A man muttered, "All lives matter," just loud enough to be heard, and I kept on walking. My entry? The thought flickered through my mind to engage, but I chickened out. Week 100, the National Mall. A memorial of 540 photographs, people lost to addiction. A volunteer made a remark about the Black community that deserved a question, a real one, asked with curiosity instead of judgment. I let it pass. I wrote that night that I should have asked, and the should have followed me home. 15 months, 20 months, 2 full years into a project whose entire purpose was conversation, and the old hidden rule was still operating. Do not ask here. Do not stop there. Nobody ever taught me that rule out loud. It was infiltrated, exactly as Heidegger said. Absorbed from somewhere I cannot name, hidden inside what felt like an ordinary caution. I want to be clear about what this means, because it's not the lesson I would prefer. I would prefer to tell you that the walk cured me. It did not. The walk showed me the rule over and over every time I obeyed it. Naming an inherited script once does not retire it. The interrogation has to be repeated. The fog Heidegger describes, that vague understanding we all operate inside, is not an embarrassment to hide. He actually insists on this. That vagueness is a fact, a real and positive starting point. The only failure is pretending we are not standing in it. So, that is the gift half of this episode. A question has 3 parts, and most failures are assembly failures. The source matters as much as the subject. Our contradictions are doors, and our understanding arrives preloaded with rules we never agreed to, which is why the questioning can never be done once. Now, for the warning half, because we must talk about the watchmaker. Everything that I have shared today comes from a book published in 1927, dedicated to a man named Edmund Husserl. The dedication reads, "In friendship and admiration." Husserl was Heidegger's teacher, the father of the philosophical movement Heidegger built his life's work upon, the man whose support made Heidegger's career possible. Edmund Husserl was Jewish. In the spring of 1933, Adolf Hitler came to power. Within months, Martin Heidegger joined the Nazi Party and was installed as rector of the University of Freiburg. This was not a quiet membership taken to keep a paycheck. His rectoral address praised the movement. He implemented its policies at his university. He signed his letters with the salute. That same year, under the new race laws, Edmund Husserl was stripped of his university privileges. The institution his student now ran turned its back on him. Husserl died in 1938, largely abandoned by the academic world he had built. In 1941, a new edition of Being and Time was printed. The dedication to Husserl was gone. Heidegger deleted the name of his Jewish teacher from the book that the teacher made possible. Heidegger stepped down as rector after about a year, and for decades his defenders pointed to that resignation as evidence of disillusionment. But he kept paying his party dues until 1945. And after the war, when the full horror was visible to the entire world, the great philosopher of questioning had nothing to say. No public reckoning, no apology to the Husserl family. And when an interviewer finally pressed him in 1966, he was evasive, and even that conversation he only allowed to be published after his death. He died in 1976 with the question still unanswered. Then, starting in 2014, his private philosophical notebooks were published, and the last defense collapsed. The notebooks contained anti-Semitism written in his own philosophical vocabulary. The hatred was not a weakness of the man standing next to the work. It was inside the work's own language. Now, why am I telling you this in an episode about the anatomy of a question? Not to be fair and balanced, not as a disclaimer to make the borrowing respectable. I'm telling you because Heidegger's life is the most complete demonstration of his own theory that history has ever produced. and the demonstration runs in the negative. Remember his quiet observation. Inquiry is the behavior of a questioner. Every question reveals the being of the one asking. The asking and the asker cannot be separated. Here was a man who could name every component of a question with a watchmaker's precision: the subject, the source, the intent. He knew the machinery better than anyone alive. And when history puts its one essential question to him, a question that arrived in his own office wearing the face of his own teacher, he refused it. Refused it in 1933 when answering was dangerous. Refused it in 1950 when answering was merely costly. Refused it in 1966 when answering was nearly free. 43 years of office hours, and he never once let that question in. Knowing the anatomy is not the asking. You can hold the complete map of inquiry in your hands and never take the one trip that matters. That's not a footnote to Heidegger's philosophy. As far as I'm concerned, it's the final chapter of it, written by his own life. I've spent years asking people a signature question: what question are you avoiding that would change everything? Heidegger is what the avoidance looks like when it runs all the way to the grave. He is the historical record of a brilliant mind that organized, theorized, and architected the very thing it would not do. I cannot leave us there, staring at a man who never turned around. And I'm not going to reach for a hero to balance him, because I do not have one to offer. What I have is a case study in a failing smaller. That's me. A few years ago, a good friend recounted a conversation she had had with an anti-racism expert. The expert had said things that were built on bias and stereotype. As she told the story, I nodded along. I feigned the shock of a man who saw the problem clearly. I did not see it. I had not caught what was wrong, and I performed as if I had. By every definition that matters, I lied to my friend, and I lied for the oldest reason there is. I wanted to protect the picture of myself as a man who gets it. On the drive home, the lie sat in the passenger seat. Why in the world would I believe I am immune to blind spots? And how exactly do I plan to learn anything while performing knowledge I do not have? So we met again. I told her I had lied, and I asked for her forgiveness. She gave it graciously, and then we had the real conversation. I listened. I asked. I learned what I had pretended to already know. I'm not telling this story because it makes me look good. A man confessing a small lie he never had to confess is not a hero. I'm telling it because of what it looks like next to a deleted dedication. Strip both stories to the anatomy. In each one, a question arrived addressed to the asker himself. Heidegger's came with the full weight of history. Mine came on a quiet drive home from coffee. He had 43 years. I had 20 minutes of highway. The scale could not be more different, and I will not pretend otherwise. But the mechanism was identical. A question lands on us, and there is a moment, sometimes a single breath long, where we choose whether to receive it or refuse it. He refused and kept refusing, and the refusals compounded into a life. I have refused plenty of times too. The alley I would not walk, the comment I let pass at Eastern Market, the expert I nodded along with. My archive of refusals is long. The only thing I can say for myself, and I say it as a fact rather than as a boast, is that sometimes, with help, I turn the car around. That turn is available at every scale. It was available to a rector in 1933. and it's available to us in whatever conversation we walked away from this week. No extra points are awarded for self-flagellation. I work hard to get it right and still get it wrong. The practice is not perfection. The practice is the drive home and what we do with it. So here's what I'm carrying out of this strange, brilliant, compromise book so far. A question has three parts: the subject, the source, the intent. When our questions fail, we can stop blaming the wording and start checking the assembly. A question needs someone to receive it. And somewhere, right now, there is a Raymond, 61 years into waiting, one standing still away from 5 hours of truth. Our contradictions are doors. We carry our questions furthest into the room where we do not fit. Our understanding comes preloaded with rules we never agreed to, and naming them once is not enough. The interrogation repeats, or the rules resume. And the anatomy is not the asking. The most precise map of questioning ever drawn was held by a man who refused the only question that ever truly came for him. The map did not save him, only the trip could have, and he never took it. 2 archives got written in this episode. One belongs to a philosopher, and it ends with a deleted name and 40 years of silence. The other is a stack of walk journals that belongs to a stumbling pilgrim and is full of failures, swallowed questions, and a few drives home that ended in turning around. We are each writing one of those archives right now. Every received question is an entry. So is every refused one. Which brings us, as it always does, back to the question I cannot stop asking of you and of myself. What question are you avoiding that would change everything? It already knows your address. It's standing in your yard. The only part of the anatomy still missing is someone willing to stand still and receive it.